Welcome back, Conservation Nation. I'm Hannah Higgins, and this is your other host, Mary Gustafson. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Russ Benedict.
So, Dr. B, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell them about you.
Sure. So I'm Russ Benedict, and I've been a professor at Central for, I think this is my 24th year now. And so I teach a bunch of the animal-based classes, and then also intro biology and conservation biology, those kinds of things. And I do research on bats and on prairies. My wife works here at Central also. My two kids came here, so kind of we're fully embedded in the Central family.
Okay, so Dr. B, you're involved in a lot of research on campus. Do you want to talk about those, what you did this summer, what you did with Hannah?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, over the years, I've been involved in quite a few different research projects and involving a variety of different angles of prairie biology and the organisms that live in prairies, as well as bat stuff too. And kind of the unifying theme in all of that is the idea of endangered. And so a lot of the bats that live in our area are either endangered or being considered to be put on the endangered species list. And then tallgrass prairie is one of the most endangered ecosystems on Earth. So that's kind of the unifying thread that connects these things together. But the other thing that's really interesting about doing research at Central College is it really is, if I was just purely doing research, then it'd be a little bit harder to justify that at Central College. So the whole idea of bringing students into that project or into every project is super important. So yeah, so every project I have then involves students in kind of the creation of the research at the very beginning, and then the collecting of data, and then the stuff you do once the data is collected, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it really is research essentially then becomes an extension of education as well. But yeah, so for the bat stuff, so bats are kind of fun because they're so poorly known that you can do really low tech kinds of work and you can add new information to what we know about bats. And so a lot of what I do there is like specifically where in the state does species X live? What kind of habitat does it live in? What kind of population trends do they have? So just real basic biology, but kind of interestingly, very often it's that basic biology that gets in the way of conservation. We don't know enough about just the basic facts to actually effectively conserve things. So I find that by doing some of this low-tech stuff, I'm actually helping a lot of the conservation decisions that are made at the state level and also at the federal level. So I'm kind of in constant conversation with folks like that and saying, okay, what other kinds of information do you need to try and work on conservation of the northern long-eared bat? So yeah, that's what a lot of the research, even though it's just what we refer to as basic natural history, it really is hugely important for conservation. And so this summer, one of the projects that we worked on was looking at the population declines in the Indiana bat. And so Indiana bats are a federally endangered species. My preliminary data from a couple of years ago looked like, from that data, it looked like their populations are way down in Iowa. But that seems to contradict some of the information that the folks at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have. And so if I'm going to go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and say, look, your numbers are wrong, here's what's actually happening, I need more info. And so that was some of what we did this summer. And you were in there for a lot of this.
Yeah.
So we went back to a lot of these places where we had caught Indiana bats in the past, and in fact where we'd caught good numbers of Indiana bats. And then we strung up nets more or less in the exact same places where we did the first time I was there. And normally and as close to the calendar night as we could to the first time it was netted, and then just saw, okay, what do we catch now? And so, yeah, almost universally what we saw was, yeah, we did not catch as many Indianas this year as we did the first time we were at those places. There was one location where we actually caught more than the first time, but all the other, I think there's another 5 locations where we either didn't catch any or didn't catch as many as we had the first time. So again, my numbers are making it look like their populations are down. I'll keep doing that project for probably the next 5 years or so, and then get kind of enough data that I can now send it to Fish and Wildlife Service and say, look, here's what I think is happening in the state. In that case, it's pretty important because Fish and Wildlife Service is actually considering delisting the Indiana bat, so taking it off of the endangered species list. And this is one of these weird instances where I'm really hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping that our data are wrong and their data showing their populations are actually doing just fine. I'm hoping they're right. I don't think they're right, but I'm hoping they are. yeah, so I need to kind of help them make sure they have the best data they can when it comes to actually trying to figure out whether they should delist this species.
And you think that their numbers come from sound data?
Their numbers, there's a little bit of it from sound, yeah, because you can use equipment to record bats, and then you can identify them with some level of confidence. And so some of their thinking is based on that. In particular, they've heard in what they believe to be Indiana bats in parts of the state which is further north of their geographic range, kind of further north of their known geographic range. And so that, to Fish and Wildlife Service, suggests that they're actually expanding their geographic range. The challenge is that you can't always identify Indiana bats versus a more common bat. This guy called the little brown bat. And so I'm kind of wondering if maybe they're mis-IDing little brown bats for Indiana. So that's one of the other kind of additional projects I'm working on, is going to these places where they've recorded a lot of bats and stringing up mist nets and actually catching bats to see are there actually Indiana bats here, or are they just misidentifying another species as Indiana bats. And thus far, kind of same story. Thus far, I have not yet caught. I think I've now been out 5 or 6 nights at those kinds of places, and we have yet to catch Indianas there. So again, I'm kind of thinking that they're mis-IDing bats. But that's really common with the acoustic stuff. Bats are kind of tough to tell from their acoustic sounds.
So if the bat was taken off the list, would there be less protections for it then? Would they take away protections and precautions?
Yes. Now it's kind of interesting because there's always politics involved in these things, and I know that one of the major complaints about the Endangered Species Act is very few species are ever taken off the list. And so the goal of putting them on the list is we can then focus on conserving them so their populations start to come up. And so some folks say, well, you've never delisted anything, and so that's evidence that this thing is not working. But that's not really true, because they kind of, these in many cases, these animals have been declining for 100, 150 years. And the folks who are complaining about the Endangered Species Act want us to be able to turn that around in 10 years. And if you can't, see evidence of increases in 10 years, then that means that the whole system needs to be scrapped. So I think that a little bit of what the Fish and Wildlife Service is doing is they want to show a success. I think they want to be able to pull the Indiana bat off to show people, look, we can do this. I mean, organisms can increase enough that they can actually be delisted. So I think that's what they're doing. And again, I'm 100% hoping I'm wrong and that we can delist them. But yeah, right now my numbers don't really show that.
And you haven't thought about using GIS in any of your research?
Well, there are amazing uses for GIS, and then there are other places where it doesn't really fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the research that I do, it doesn't really fit. And so in other words, I'd be happy to talk to folks who understand GIS, and they can show me, okay, based on the projects that you're doing, here's how we can incorporate GIS into that.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I see, most of the projects that I do, if I'm trying to figure out if an organism is declining, and I'm going back to places where I've already been before, I'm not really sure if I see how GIS fits into that. But don't hear me wrong. I think GIS is amazing, and some of the research that's being done with it is really cool. I'm just not 100% sure if it fits into my project. And I don't really want to force it into a place where it doesn't really provide any benefit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
So how long have you been studying bats and small mammals too?
Yeah. So bats I've been studying, I think I started in 1987, something along those lines. So I'm approaching 40 years now on those guys. And most of that, I'm kind of the early years were all in Nebraska, but then, the last 24 years have mostly been here in Iowa. I've also done work on bats in other places, including in, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, when I take students to Costa Rica. And in fact, I tortured Mary a couple of years ago when she came along on that trip. And yeah, we did catch bats when we were down in Costa Rica. So I've been working on those guys for a while now.
So, Dr. B, why are you interested in small mammals? Is there a lot of them around? Do they have a big impact on the ecosystem? Why are you drawn to them?
Yeah, so I first got introduced to them when I was working on my PhD. So, when you're doing a PhD, you have to do a big research project. And so my research project focused on these little guys called northern short-tailed shrews. And shrews are very common around here. And they're kind of standard mouse size. And so you can catch them in these these live traps that are really designed mostly to catch mice. And so as I was out catching shrews for this research, I was catching all sorts of other things too. And so as you start to see the different kinds of critters that live around you, it's pretty hard to not fall in love with them. And there's a whole bunch of different little guys that live around here. All these mouse-sized critters. People just kind of tend to lump them all into one group. Here in Iowa, we've got probably 12 or 15 different kinds of mice and shrews, the little things that live in the grasses around here. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them are never really coming into houses and becoming a pest. Many of them play really important roles in ecosystems, and pretty much all of them lead really interesting lives. And some of them are ugly, but if you understand why they're ugly, they become cool. And so, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Whenever I've taken students out and we catch mice and stuff like that, it's kind of hard not to fall in love with these things when you start seeing them kind of up close in a controlled setting, as opposed to something like running across your kitchen floor where you kind of, you get that little panic reaction. But no, to study small mammals is pretty amazing.
What's your favorite one other than that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I love shrews, and of course I did, did my research on them, so they kind of grew on me. But no, shrews are really amazing because super high metabolic rate, and so their life is basically eat for an hour, sleep for an hour, eat for an hour for their entire lives. For some of the little tiny shrews that live around here, if they go for like 5 or 6 hours without eating, they die. So they have to eat constantly. But it's kind of interesting if you look at those guys over the course of the winter, and they remain active in winter, they actually gain weight. So that gives you a sense for how much insect and earthworm and snail activity there is around here that, they actually gain weight over the winter. So shrews are really pretty amazing, but there's just so many other mice. I love these little guys called harvest mice. They're a tiny little mouse. And I don't know if they ever get in houses, but they're called harvest mice because they climb up the stems of the prairie plants and clip the seeds off and then carry them back down and eat them down on the ground in safety. But yeah, they're just gorgeous little mice that are pretty common in grassy areas around here.
Cool.
Yeah. And a lot of the mice, it's kind of interesting because I didn't really intend for this to happen, but I'm really kind of the expert in Iowa on bats, but also on mice and shrews. Just nobody studies these things. And so when you have been out studying them a lot, it doesn't take too long until all of a sudden you're the go-to person to now come learn about these things. And quite a few of them are declining in numbers. So I just took part in a big thing run by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, where they were trying to assess all of the mammals in the state and try and figure out, okay, which ones do we need to pay attention to from a conservation standpoint? And so I just thought it was kind of funny that here I am sitting here with all these other professors, but all the questions keep coming right to me because I'm the only one out trapping these kinds of things and learning about them.
Do you want to talk about the field station? I know we've taken trips there, and lots of other classes take trips to go learn about science there. So do you want to tell us more about that campus resource?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the Carlson Kuiper Field Station is the name of it, and it's located about 15 minutes off campus, so between here and Knoxville. And it's about 80 acres, and that's a good-sized hunk of property. You can spend basically all day kind of slowly walking around and exploring, and never leave the property. So it's a very interesting mix of some European grasslands, some grasslands that are just dominated by non-native species, and then some areas that we've converted into prairie. And then it also has some really high quality forests there. Literally some of the nicest forests anywhere in the southern part of the state are found on our field station. And then there's a little building, there's a pond. So it's kind of a really neat resource to use in classes. And so during my interview at Central College, we went out and visited the field station, and the person who was leading that said, and you could help to manage this. And so, man, that was a big sales pitch for me. The idea that I could eventually become the manager of the field station was a real sales pitch for me. And so I have spent just massive amounts of time out there. Probably the biggest projects I've done is converting what were just areas dominated by non-native grasses and turning those into pretty high quality prairies. So I think we now have about 30 acres roughly of prairie out there. And there's some of them are about 5 years old, and other ones are almost 20 years old now. Some of my very first prairie planting is out there. It's kind of ugly. I made some mistakes in that. But that's okay. You learn from mistakes. And so the most recent one, this one that's about 5 years old, is really turning out and looking pretty spectacular. And we planted that with about 105 different species of prairie plants. And if I had to pay for that, that would have been probably $15,000 to $20,000 per acre, because the prairie seed is very expensive by the time you get into like really diverse prairie mixes. But we collected a lot of the seed ourselves, and then I got a bunch of grant money from various places to buy the seed as well. So we ended up, the college didn't pay anything for this, and now it's a pretty darned amazing prairie that's coming in. And the nice thing is if it's taken care of, it will last for hundreds and hundreds of years of students into the future can be benefiting from the stuff that's been done out there. Yeah, so pretty amazing place.
Did you work out there this summer?
Yes, yeah, we did a little bit of work. Some years I have had summer research students for a bunch of years now, and some years we spend a lot of time doing like grunt work out there, and then other years we do more research out there. And so this year was more of kind of a research, kind of a summer out there. I don't know, did we do any real like grunt work out there? I don't really,
Not really.
think of that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't think of it.
But because we didn't do that, there's now a whole bunch that needs to be done this
Next
fall
year,
and
yeah.
next year. That's right. That's right. Yeah. But no, there's a lot of invasive species. So plants that move in that can threaten to take over the place, and so that's a lot of this kind of the day-to-day grind of trying to keep that place as valuable for students and as valuable for nature as you can, is trying to control those things. So yeah, we have a lot of that work to do, but it's kind of a never-ending process, and so that's kind of the depressing part about it. You put in huge amounts of time, and the time is really effective, and you can see what you've done. But if you then just sit back for the next 10 years and say, yeah, we did that, it just all comes right back again. So it's kind of a constant thing.
So 2 years ago, I took your class, Tropical Ecology, and so it was a fall semester class, and then in the winter, we got to spend 3 weeks in Costa Rica. So, and you're doing it again this year.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that and kind of the importance of like getting out of our ecosystem, like seeing other countries, like getting to see like a rainforest when we're used to fields and prairies, like,
Right.
and how important that is to students.
Right. Yeah, so I started the class a bunch of years ago. So this year's trip, I think, is the 13th trip, or maybe even 14th trip now. And so that means that over the course of the last 20 years or so, we've now taken like 150 kids to Costa Rica and Belize. So that's really neat to think about. But yeah, I had done a class similar to this when I was a student, when I was in graduate school. And so it had such a big impact on me that I knew right away that I wanted to do something like that when I became a professor. So we visit Costa Rica for, I think it was 12 days, and then we spent about 6 days ballparks with some travel time taken off here and there in Belize. Costa Rica is all about exploring different kinds of tropical forests. And so people always think of rainforests, and we do visit a couple of different kinds of rainforests. But then we also spend some time in what's called tropical dry forest.
That was my favorite one, actually.
Yeah. The dry forests are interesting because in some ways they don't look all that vastly different from what you see around here. As you're walking along and you kind of lull yourself into thinking, I'm just walking in Iowa, and then a monkey runs across the trail in front of you or something like that, and kind of, oh yeah, we're not in Iowa anymore. But the tropics are really such a center for diversity. Most organisms have just huge numbers of species in the tropics, and then the number of species in that group declines as you head either north or south out of the tropics. And so, in a sense, we want to see that. As field biologists, it's important to see that. There are tons and tons of organisms that live in the tropics that don't even, their entire group doesn't live outside of the tropics. So you just see things there that you would never see here. And so that's really the goal, to try and kind of get a little bit of a sense for just that stunning diversity and complexity that you see down in rainforest areas. And then once we leave Costa Rica, then in Belize, we mostly snorkel on coral reefs. And so again, just kind of these entire ecosystems that you don't find, obviously you don't find those in Iowa. Mm-hmm. But no, so to immerse students out. So one of the overall goals is just to immerse kids in nature. And so I do a lot of that, regardless of whether we're in Iowa or in Costa Rica. So just getting students out in nature is hugely important. But then having them see these other places and different kinds of critters is cool and pretty impactful. But then on top of that, I didn't really intend this. When I first designed this class, it wasn't really in my head that, okay, this is going to be an important cultural experience. We're just going there to look at critters, but that was kind of dumb of me because it is a cultural experience. And yeah, so to experience new places, to feel like, and I don't know if you had this feeling, but to feel like you're an outsider, that you know, in a sense, you don't belong in these places. In a sense, to feel like you're a minority, I think is a good thing to experience at some point in your life. And as many times as I've been to these places, it kind of amazes me that I'm always that last plane ride. When you get on the last plane ride, or the plane ride when you leave Belize and you hear the stewardess talking to you, or the flight attendant, and they have like a Texas accent or something like that. There's like a little bit of, okay, now we're going back to the U.S. I'm feeling a little more comfortable. So that idea of, kind of forcing students out of their comfort zone, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, especially when you're there for like 3 weeks at a time. Like, it was a big shock, like, to go there. And then, like, when you're done, you're like, oh my gosh, like, now we're going back to like what we're used to.
Right. Yeah. But no, it's a wonderful experience. You know, like I said, I think this is going to be year 13 that I go, and I'm not tired of it yet. You know, I still am anxious. You know, I've got 9 kids coming this year, and I really can't wait to. I want to see their faces when we see some of these critters, but I also want to see their faces. I peek sometimes when we're, especially on like bus rides. I'll peek to see how they're reacting when we're driving by a place that's full of like shacks that are made out of cardboard and sheet metal. When we're seeing poverty at a level that you just don't see in the Midwest, I want to make sure that students, you know, aren't sound asleep when we're doing that. They need to see that. So I peek and just see, okay, who's actually looking out the window and noticing these things. Yeah, but we do bat stuff there, and just to give you a little bit of a sense for that idea of differences in diversity. So Iowa has you can see 11 different species of bats in Iowa. Costa Rica is a little bit smaller than Iowa is, but yet they've had 114 species recorded there. If you go down a little bit further south into like Brazil or Ecuador, kind of the real center of the tropics, now you're probably talking about 200 species of bats in a similar kind of an area. So that's what we're going there to see, is that it's just absolutely stunning diversity. But even more than that, there are entire families of bats that live in the tropics, and those families don't even occur in North America or in the United States at all. So not only is it just numbers of species, but it's these kinds of groups that don't even occur outside of the tropics that we're going to experience, and we definitely do experience them.
Do the bats there look like significantly different than the ones in Iowa? Or?
Some of them do, yeah. Especially some of the ones that belong in some of the other families. So we catch a number of the free-tailed bats. And we do have free-tailed bats in Iowa, but they're super rare. And in fact, I've never seen them. I've heard them, but I've been able to tell I'm hearing them with my little bat detector that I'm listening to. But other than that, you just don't really see them. But the real stars of the show down there are what are called the leaf-nosed bats. It's a family with tons of species, and they all have this little kind of triangular sliver of skin that sticks up off the top of the nose. And those guys, there are lots of fruit eaters within there. There's a fish eater. There's another species that specializes in eating other bats. There's frog eaters in that group. I mean, so just all of these kinds of bats that you don't see anything like that in Iowa. Did you enjoy the snorkeling? And it doesn't matter to me what the answer to this is.
It was very different for me. I've never been a strong swimmer.
Okay.
And it was like, I've been to the ocean, but I've never been like, let's drive out into the ocean and then you're just going to jump off this boat and snorkel around. And so, but it was really cool to like, but I just wasn't very adventurous in it. There were a lot more adventurous people. And like when they said, okay, we can get back on the boat, like I was one of the first ones. But it was really cool to see. But yeah, it was just different for me. It was a good experience for me to have because it was different. Like I've never experienced anything like that. So I'm really glad I did it, but it was very different.
The first time when I went to Belize as a student, I was not terribly comfortable in the water. And so when the whole group, when we first got in the water that very first day, everybody just kind of took off. And the next thing I know, like 5 minutes later, I'm like, everybody's gone. And I'm here by myself, still standing next to the dock because I'm really too afraid to just jump and really get in. It took me all but an hour until I actually got down into the water and started paddling around. I've just never been comfortable in water. And even though I love to take students there, I'm always a little bit nervous while we're out there, just kind of thinking, what could go wrong out here? Nothing ever has. And the folks who are are leading us while we're there are so good at what they do that I shouldn't worry about it, but I've just always had that, little bit of discomfort in water, and it hasn't gone away. But at the same time, and kind of what happened while I was there, standing in the water by myself, was at some point I thought, okay, I'm just going to put the mask on my face and just kind of get down in the water and look around. And so I got down on my knees and then just peered around, and underneath me was this little worm, a worm called a Christmas tree worm. And Christmas tree worms have these little tentacles that stick up above, so their whole body's buried down in the rock, but they have these tentacles that stick up, and they're beautiful. They're really spirally in design, kind of like a Christmas tree. And I saw that, and I just couldn't believe that. I had seen their pictures in books, but I'd never actually seen this kind of an organism at all. And that was it. I mean, I just needed that. That was like there's incredible stuff out here. Just get over your fears and get out there, and you're going to see amazing stuff. And I did. So I like the way you phrase that, because I was kind of there with you. Yeah. And like I said, even today, I'm still every once in a while like, okay, I'm happy to be out of the water. Yeah, definitely. But no, it's an incredible experience. It's just a world that is so unlike anything that really most humans ever encounter. So it's
Okay, so another cool place that at least you've taken me is to Nebraska, and you wouldn't think it's a cool place, but it ended up being pretty cool. So how long have you taken students there?
Yeah, for a very long time. In fact, when I was your age, I worked at a nature center, and we would do trips out to the same places then, and it would be sometimes it would be teenagers I'd be taking out there, other times it would be old folks. But yeah, the whole kind of north central and northwestern parts of Nebraska are just stunning landscapes, and part of the beauty of going there is that nobody knows they're there, and so they tend to be very quiet, and you can. I once camped out there for like 10 days and never even saw another human being, and so those are just kind of amazing experiences. So despite what other people might say, Anya, you're probably listening to this, Nebraska has some truly amazing spots. And so I've been taking people there for a long time. I've been taking Central students there ever since I got here. And we kind of tend to do more or less the same destinations every time we go. One of my favorite things about going out there is you've got basically intact ecosystems. And in the Midwest, that's so hard to find. You in the Midwest, when we visit prairies, you're normally visiting a little 5-acre prairie that's completely surrounded by suburbia or by cornfields. And so you go out to Nebraska, and you can now look for 50 miles off in any direction and see prairie the whole way. So that's a good chunk of the reason why we go out there, is to see this is what an entire landscape of prairie looks like. But the other thing about it is, because the ecosystems are healthy, I don't really have to plan anything. I just say, okay, we're just going to go out to this spot and take a walk, and we're going to find a lot, and we always do. So I don't really have to plan it. We just go take strolls, and I know we're going to see a whole truckload of stuff. But yeah, it's different kinds of prairies than what we have here in Iowa. It's further west, and therefore it's a lot drier, and that means you're seeing different plants, you're seeing different animals, and so yeah, really really amazing experiences.
So is the prairie there a lot healthier because we can't use it as well?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, especially the region in the north central part of the state that's called the Sandhills. The soils are just pure, really fine sand. There's like a half an inch of topsoil on the top. So if you plow that, the topsoil blows away, and now you've just got sand, and you can't farm sand. So essentially, that's what protected that whole area, is it couldn't be farmed. But as it turns out, you get such good prairie growth there that it's great for cattle grazing. And so there is a really kind of thriving economy of cattle grazing. But again, you're in the situation where if you overgraze it, you lose the topsoil, everything blows away. So they have to graze it really gently. And so that ends up meaning that you've got really healthy prairie ecosystems left. And then way out west, you've got so little rain. By the time you get to western Nebraska, you're in like 14 inches of rain. And that's just a tough place to grow crops. And so again, you're actually better off from an agricultural standpoint by lightly grazing the land. And so again, that means you have pretty decent quality prairies too. But in addition to that, you've also got these like buttes and cliffs and pine forests and places. So it's just not a landscape that people really picture when they think of Nebraska. So really kind of dramatic scenery and places where students can climb around on rocks and scare their professors into thinking they're going to die and all that kind of stuff. Not that anybody did anything like that. Right.
No, I was not expecting to see that many cool things. I was like, okay, there's cool prairies there, but I wasn't expecting the pine trees and the rock formations. That was just,
Yeah.
that was probably my favorite parts, just the scenery.
Right.
But,
And that one place that we explore that has all the fossils too. That's such
Yeah.
an amazing spot. Yeah. So mammal fossils from about 20 to 30 million years ago. There's a spot where there's rhino footprints kind of fossilized in the mud, and we definitely don't think of rhinos as being a critter that lives in Nebraska, but they did back in the day.
that was a gala.
Oglala National Grasslands.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what classes do you take there?
That is, sometimes it's just the summer research students, and that's when Hannah came along. It was just the summer research students, and so we were filming, doing some filming of prairie stuff for stuff I'm going to be doing with elementary kids, but also just goofing off and kind of going out and exploring prairies and kind of seeing the students bond with each other and really kind of immersing them in nature. I do about every other spring. I teach this class that's called Natural History of American Ecosystems. And that class takes a trip out there too. So I'll be, I think I'm going to be offering that this spring coming up, but I got to get going because students are registering for that. So.
Like it's kind of a double-edged sword. You're like, oh, this is so cool, and then we learn about like, oh, their habitat's gone. Oh, they're slowly dying. Oh, like we can't see them anymore. So like, how do you handle that and like wanting to protect them like as you learn about them?
Right. Yeah. So most folks who do field biology, what we just generally call field biology, do it out of the love of organisms. The work is pretty hard. Sometimes really nasty conditions. And so if you don't love the critters that you're studying, you're not going to be out there doing that very long. So yeah, it is purely love that motivates you. And so when you start to see those things decline, that really hurts. So I mentioned a little while ago when I first came to Iowa, of the 11 kinds of bats that live in Iowa, one of those was listed as an endangered species. By the time I get ready to retire, which is probably just 5-6 years from now, we think there's going to be 5 bats listed as endangered. And so that gives you a sense for kind of the overall story of nature, because lots of things around us are declining pretty rapidly. And so a little bit took me off guard how much of an emotional toll that takes when you see your critters disappearing. But yeah, so one of my favorite little bats, northern long-eared bat, was a guy that I used to catch. I pretty typically catch 50 to 60 or 70 of them over the course of the summer. I now haven't seen one for like the last 3 summers. And so, yeah, that hurts. And so one of the things that's important to think about if you're going into the nature world is kind of, you have to know going ahead into it that you're going to have an emotional toll. And you kind of need to recognize that this is going to impact my mental health. So I need to be ready for that. Because I sometimes see people who just kind of burn out and they just leave the profession entirely and they go become a truck driver or whatever they want to do. And that burnout is largely driven by kind of the emotional issues. So yeah, you need to protect yourself and be ready to know that you're going to see some pretty bad stuff. And so I actually visit with a therapist, and I go see her about 2 times a year. And she specializes in eco-anxiety and climate anxiety. And so when I first went to see her, my logic was, of course, I'm a big tough guy and nothing ever bugs me. And so I went to see her thinking, okay, I am just going to see her because I want to be able to tell students, important little nuggets of wisdom. And within like my first hour of visiting with her, I was like, wow, this is really actually very helpful for me to hear. So I didn't really understand kind of what an emotional impact seeing all this was having on me until I started talking with her. So I think, yeah, kind of recognizing that there is going to be a mental health toll to seeing these declines is important. I think there's a bunch of things we can do to help this. But then also recognizing that, yeah, if you need help, then go talk to people, because it genuinely does offer you a lot of benefits to visit with folks, and gives you little tools, just little things you can think about. Okay, don't let my brain spiral away into these bad thoughts. Recognizing when that's happening, stop when that's happening, that kind of stuff. So it gives you tools for just protecting yourself.
Okay, Dr. Reese, so you only have a couple years left, you mentioned. So how are you going to spend that time? Are you going to continue doing the same stuff, the same research, or something different?
So a little bit of a mix of both. Yeah. So I'm approaching retirement. But the thing that's kind of interesting to think about when you're a field biologist, and so I entered this career purely out of the love of critters, and the love of connecting people with critters. The way I often say that is, as soon as I'm walking around outside, if I find something really cool, I get down on my knees, get all excited, look at it, take some pictures, and then I immediately look around for somebody to bring them over here and show it to them. So it's both the love of nature and then the love of connecting people to nature. But when you're motivated by something like that, you never retire from that. So even though I'm going to retire from being a full-time professor, I'm still going to continue to do environmental education in one way or another. But I have been thinking a lot about, how do I spend this last 5 to 6 years of my professor job? And I will still continue to do a little bit of research, but and largely I'm going to be doing the research because of keeping students involved in it, because I think it's such a powerful tool for helping students kind of explore nature. But I want to get kind of back to my roots a bit. When I was your age, while I was literally working on my undergraduate degree, I worked at a nature center. And I started off there just doing like grunt work, cleaning trails and making new trails, that kind of stuff. But then I eventually got into the environmental education side of that. And so I love connecting people to nature. Especially I love connecting kids to nature. And so that's one of the projects I'm working on here for this last couple of years is I'm calling it Local Nature for Local Schools. And so I'm getting back out into the local schools and trying to do multiple experiences with a particular class. So I go in and talk to them. Then we have some sort of a field experience. Then I create a website that has activities for them to do. All of these things are related to that same topic that we've been talking about. So yeah, I'm thinking a lot about how can I have my biggest impact in terms of like trying to connect people back to nature. Nature is declining all around us, but so few folks nowadays have a strong connection to nature. So either they A, don't recognize that nature's in trouble, or B, they just don't really care. And so I want to spend the next 5 to 6 years kind of really pounding away on improving that.
So I noticed your little bat sticker here on your water bottle. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the last time that I went to Costa Rica and Belize. There was a student who came along with us, Kaylee. Kaylee Pfeiffer's her name, and she was an art major. And so one of the things I really love about teaching at Central as a whole, but specifically about that tropical ecology class, is you don't have to be a biology major to come along. And so sometimes students with other interests come along. And so having Kaylee along was really pretty magical because she was an artist, but she also was interested in the idea of telling stories to kids. And so using her art to tell stories to kids. And so based on her experiences on our trip, she ended up writing a book kind of roughly based on the bats that you can see in the sticker there. So we saw these little bats in Costa Rica that live underneath leaves. So they get up underneath the leaf and they snip the veins on the leaf so the leaf kind of collapses down, making kind of a tent shape, and then they live under there. So they're called tent-making bats. And so we saw some of them, and they're absolutely stunning. Just flaming white with yellow ears. Just crazy design. And so Kaylee really got very interested in those and then made a book off of this. So the sticker is from the book. And so yes, it was sharing her experiences, because it seemed to me that all the students kind of revolved, kind of got into this and helping her find things and helping and kind of watching her do the artwork and helping her think about, okay, here would be a cool story to tell. So I loved seeing the science students kind of get involved in the art side of things. But then she did that too. She didn't really, I don't think she really went on this trip thinking, I'm going to become an author of children's books who really focuses on conservation of nature. Mm-hmm. But that's how she kind of came out of that. And that's kind of where she's going now. So to see the interaction between people with different ideas, but then to see how nature can impact people, and now see it becoming a kid's book to help connect kids to nature. Yeah, that was kind of an amazing experience and it really just kind of shows the power of a school like Central, where you're bringing together kids with all sorts of backgrounds and then exploring ideas from all sorts of different perspectives. So yeah, that was an amazing experience.
For today's fun fact, we're going to have Dr. V give you one.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So one of the small mammals that I've done a lot of research on are these guys called short-tailed shrews. And short-tailed shrews look kind of like a mouse. So when you first see one, you'll think it's a mouse. But then you'll realize it's got a super short tail and it's really dark gray, like almost charcoal gray, and just has tiny little beady eyes. And so you'll kind of realize, oh, I don't think it's a mouse. It's something different. And so then what you're going to do next is you're going to reach down and you're going to try and pick this thing up. And as soon as you do that, you're going to realize that, hey, that hurts. And then you're going to realize that really hurts because you are holding one of the very few venomous mammals on Earth. So short-tailed shrews actually are venomous. And so their venom kills mice. But for insects, it paralyzes them. So they can store grasshoppers for weeks at a time. Grasshopper can't go anywhere because it's paralyzed, but yet it's still alive, so therefore it doesn't rot. But for humans, it's supposed to give you kind of a bee sting-like sensation. Only that pain lasts for apparently like 2 to 3 days. So apparently it's pretty darn impressive venom. And they're all around us right here. They're very common in our local area. I've tried a couple of times because I'm one of these weird people. I need to experience things. So I've tried to let myself get bit, but I always cowered out. And the shrews don't really have, it's not like a snake where they can just like bite and you've got it. They have to like chew on you for like 20, 30 seconds or so. And so I've always shaken them off and before I could actually feel anything. So one of these days I'll actually have the courage to let one bite me so I can see what that feels like to be envenomated by a short-tailed shrew.
But you've never had, because like there's that, and then in Costa Rica I talked about the bullet ants, like or like even like a sea urchin, like you've never had a bad experience. Like
no, I have not. I've certainly been zapped by lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
Scorpions in Costa Rica, but that's pretty quick. There's some of the most painful ones are some of these little tiny ants that we encounter down in Costa Rica. They live in plants, so they live in these bullhorn acacia plants, and they protect the plant. And some of those, wow, that's impressive. I mean, that's really impressive pain for like 2-3 hours or so. So that's probably the worst I've ever encountered. But I've never encountered anything that like made me think, ooh, I better go see a doctor about this. Yeah, nothing like that.
That's pretty lucky with your
a little bit.
with your field work.
Yeah.
If you don't already, go follow us on Instagram, conservationnation_CUI. We also post on Spotify and YouTube.
Thank you all for listening to episode 3 of our podcast. Go outside and enjoy the day, and we'll see you next time with our next surprise guest.